Well, hey, everybody. We are here with my good friend, Mike Foster. How are you, Mike?
I am good. I think the word good is appropriate for these times. I don't want to say great. I want to say fantastic. I'm excited. I think all of those words just feel so disconnected from here we are, but I'm good.
Well, let's be honest. It's a dumb question.
Yeah.
Like to ask, how are you right now? There's a general fog out there. We're all readjusting to what words we used to use mean. So yeah. I'll take it. I'll take good. I like good.
Good and antsy. A sprinkling of lots of antsy in there.
Hey, I've been getting a lot of emails and texts about this show that we're doing. People are tracking. That's pretty cool.
That's awesome.
So I think the things that we're kind of putting on the table to talk about are resonating with people. It's the struggle right now. People are trying to find handles for normalcy in the fog of however long this is going to go. I want to explore today something that I know you have dealt with. First off, how many clients did you see last week? Or how many hours did you spend counseling last week?
About 35 hours.
Okay.
In front of Zoom, all Zoom. Intense. And that's really actually been my last 6 weeks, is just really leaning in and trying to support people the best that I can. And all across the country, all different topics. But yeah, it's real. So
you're really spending time with people who are in the fog, trying to understand. So you're seeing the issues right now up close. And so I want to just spend some time, because you've learned quite a bit in those conversations, I'm sure, that can really help everybody. So I want to talk today a little bit about addiction. And you see it. I know everybody out there sees it. And as a culture, we're paying attention, and it's almost like a joke that's out there, or it's that's not good, where you see pornography traffic is way up. Alcohol sales are way up. And this is true pre-COVID. Whenever things are stressful, whenever moments are at their worst, we go back to our worst self. We go back to our most destructive coping mechanisms. And the floodgates have opened on all that. And how in the world, for somebody who's struggling with addiction, for somebody who's living with somebody that they're watching going down the downward spiral, and I don't want to just say, well, stop, because that's not helpful. But getting deeper underneath the thing that people are struggling with, how do we have some handles for moving out of these really tough places in our lives? Yeah. Well, first off, I think there's probably a lot of people watching right now who go, this doesn't involve me. Yeah. This topic's probably for somebody else. This isn't my topic. This isn't my struggle. So I think, first of all, we gotta kind of define addiction or addictive behavior. And in kind of its most simplest terms is where when we feel distress, when we feel uncomfortable, when we feel pain, we feel emotions that don't like. Addiction says we are going to reach for a coping mechanism, and we'll continue to reach for that coping mechanism in spite of the negative consequences of that coping mechanism. So a lot of times, and this is a big problem in addiction, is we'll go, well, hey, I don't have a porn problem or a drug problem or an alcohol problem. That's not my coping mechanism. It's okay to have a wine problem maybe, or a shopping problem, or there's good coping mechanisms and negative coping mechanisms. There's good addictions and there's negative addictions. And I think what the more helpful thing is to say, listen, if we're turning to something to escape when it has ultimately a negative consequence, because I can say, hey, if you're spending $1,000 on Amazon.com because you don't like the way you're feeling or you don't like this experience, that's a problem, okay? Yeah. That's going to have a negative consequence. Yeah. So for us to say, hey, probably every single one of us has addictive behaviors that are hurting us and not helping us. Yeah. I think there's, especially for people who grew up in the church, or they've heard kind of the pat Christian answers of, oh, you shouldn't. Oh, let go and let God. Or I think a lot of times churches make the addiction issue worse because we just have this whether it's stated or unstated, a guilt lever we pull in moments like this, or for somebody who's out there watching going, I can't believe I am struggling with this, this, and this. And it's not enough, like, you can't just say, well, let go and let God, or kind of those, pat Christian answers. There's real, and as Christians, we believe this, there's something that's missing in terms of human connection. Mm-hmm. And you said to me one time that the opposite of addiction.
So it's spot on. The opposite of addiction isn't sobriety.
Yeah.
But the opposite of addiction is connection.
Yes.
And at the heart of all addictive behavior is a disconnect.
Yes.
The problem is disconnection.
Yes.
And so I'm going to reach for something that I can have a connection with.
Yeah.
So, let me give you the example of maybe pornography, for example. If I'm not experiencing intimacy or connection with my spouse or whatever, I'm going to reach for that. I'm going to connect with something.
Because the human heart is designed
Absolutely.
for connection.
Yes.
Christian, not like it is across the board.
Which is so interesting, like in terms of the season that we're in with COVID, we have a massive disconnection problem. We're disconnected from our employees that we work with. We're disconnected from each other. We're disconnected from our neighbors. Social distancing is like this whole disconnection, experience. And so we, again, are wired for connection, healthy connection. And when we don't have it, we're going to reach for other things, simpler things, possibly more destructive things, hurtful things that we will connect with. But we will connect. We will seek out the connection. And so, again, we have to honor our wiring. We have to honor kind of the core needs that God has put inside of us. And it's not that wanting connection is a bad thing. It's a very good thing. And so if we're experiencing disconnection, we have to be very aware of what we are connecting with.
That's good. So if I'm watching this and I'm going, I am really in a moment of my worst, like all my old struggles are coming back, whether it's pornography, whether it's alcohol, whether it's, smoking joints in the back. Yeah, all those things. I think there's something at a certain level where I go, I should just pray more. I got to read the scriptures more. I feel so terrible about myself. But actually, if you're a car, the dashboard is blinking. You need human connection. Mm-hmm. Addiction is a reminder to you that you have missed human connection. Mm-hmm. And what's so fascinating, if I hear you correctly, about this cultural moment is the very, what our government has asked us to do is actually pouring gas on the fire, not saying they shouldn't ask us to do it, but it's actually it's cut out connection at 1,000 different levels, which is when I'm reaching for the bottle and I'm reaching, whatever, it's that desire to connect. And so we have to find new ways. What are some new strategies in this moment if I'm drowning in addiction to start to connect? How do I begin to find my way out of that hole?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing I'd say is, I'm a big, big believer, as are you, in the power of grace in our lives and the power of, when we allow shame, when we allow secrecy, when we allow guilt to drive the narrative, it's going to produce really poor results in our lives. It's actually going to lead us into a darker hole that we're in terms of the addiction. And so part of is finding freedom and getting into connection is for us to actually give ourselves grace. This is not the time to beat ourselves up. This is not the time to say, I should have done better, I should have known better, or that kind of shaming of ourselves or shaming of somebody else. Again, if somebody is struggling in this area, this is not the time to add to the shame. Mm-hmm. So we need to start with grace, God's grace for ourselves, grace for each other, saying, okay, we understand what's going on here. We know why those levers are being pulled and why we are doing the things that we're doing. And so start with grace. But then I also think that addiction thrives in secrecy. So anytime that you are hiding, anytime that you are denying, anytime that you feel like there's a piece of your life or your heart or your story that can't be seen. My guess is addiction is the opportunity to breed and fester.
Yeah.
And so telling somebody, to me, is the very, if there's grace, like let's have grace, but then let's talk about it.
Yeah.
And that's why we're going to put it out on the table today, because it's like, if we don't say it, we don't present it, we don't name it, we don't call it what it is, we don't create an environment to have a conversation, nobody's going to get well.
Yeah.
And so grace, and I think the vulnerability or the risk to tell somebody that you're hurting and you're struggling.
Yeah. One of the things that we have said before here at the Church RB is your struggle, your addiction, whatever, it's a root, or it's a branch, it's not a root. And we want to be dealing with roots, not branches.
Yeah.
And it's really easy, especially with somebody you love, to look at the branch and say, don't, but at the same time, entering in with empathy, saying, there's a root here. There's something deeper here that's going on. Or even with yourself, like if you're just beating yourself up over the branches of addiction, it's giving yourself grace and empathy for what is the root cause of this. And right now, we are in a hot mess of a situation that has added a lot of, it's put that issue front and center for you in your life.
I mean, if you look at all the studies around addiction, high 90s percentiles, dotted line back to trauma, usually childhood trauma that leads to coping, numbing out, habits, rhythms to help us not feel the pain of trauma. So you have past unresolved trauma in our lives, which we will often turn to an addictive behavior to overcome whatever feelings we feel about that and get stirred up in us. And then you have new trauma called what we're experiencing now in our society, really societal, global trauma, loss, destabilization in our own lives. And so you have old trauma, new trauma colliding. The fact that we have increases in addictive behaviors right now, like it makes perfect sense.
Of course.
And so like let's again, compassion around this topic is so key, because anytime we're kind of in this friend, like this is I hate the addiction, I hate the drug, I hate what it's doing, and we're angry at it, we judge it, we shame it, I get it, I understand that reaction. But if we connect it into the why, I think that's the place of Jesus to me, is like
go
why?
back to the source,
the roots.
And it probably won't take you long to get there.
No.
You know the big thing that you're numbing or trying to. And I think one of the things that's scary as a pastor or as a human being is the normalization of coping mechanisms and addictive behaviors in our society.
Yep.
It's like, well, that's life. That's just, nobody bats an eye when they see alcohol sales way up, pornography traffic way up. We just go, well, that's just, that's how the world is.
It's like a joke at some level.
It's like a joke at some level. But the thing that I always try to remind people, if you go, oh, that's just life, is eventually what happens with addiction, and I know you see this all the time too, I get into this cycle of addiction to numb whatever it is, and I'm trying to eliminate a problem. And eventually the problem is the coping mechanism becomes the new problem. And it becomes the thing that it destroys the marriage, it destroys my health, whatever it is. And so if there's something in you that goes, it's not a big deal, this is life. No, like you have to deal with it, because eventually the thing that you're using to numb your pain becomes the greatest source of your pain. And it becomes the
other thing is like a kind of a common attribute of addiction is the increase. The increase of the coping mechanism, the pervasiveness of the coping. It may start here, but it's always requiring a little bit more from you. And so that's why we have to let's talk about it now. Let's catch it early.
We're a couple months into this pandemic. Who knows obviously how long. And when these patterns get set, it's hard to get out. They're the tires spinning in the mud right now.
And also, let's just say, the denial of who we are and our needs, our experiences, our sadness, depression, whatever thing that we're trying to escape, like, that's really important.
Yeah.
And it isn't something that we need to hide or escape from. It's actually something that if we can bring it to the table with safe people and talk about it and just share vulnerably about it, man, we can get so much healing and freedom versus, kind of going on this really destructive ride.
Yeah.
And there is hope. Like that's the thing. It's not like you're not stuck. You're not trapped, but it is going to require a different solution.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, I know for you, for me, I believe in a Jesus who shows up and doesn't fold his arms and say, "How dare you?" Mm-hmm. I believe in a Jesus who wants to get to the source of the pain, what causes the numbing to begin with, and say, let's go there, let's heal that. I mean, it's the woman at the well who's, she's there because she doesn't want to see anybody, and Jesus shows up and he's not trying to avoid her greatest struggle and her greatest crisis of having 5 husbands and the man you're now with is not your husband. He's like, let's talk about it. Let's get to that thing. And I want to bring grace and some truth into that wound. And at the end of the day, the addiction is pointing an arrow at the place that Jesus wants to go and bring some grace and peace. And we have to do that for each other. I mean, the Jesus people in the Good Friday world, being like Jesus at the well with the woman sitting down next to you, saying, "Hey, I know, like there's a struggle here. Mm-hmm. I know there's an ache here that you don't know what to do with, and it's bigger than you, and it's swallowing you whole." Grace.
Yeah, it's maybe kind of the simple way to say is you don't have an addiction problem, you have a pain problem. And can we talk about the pain?
Yeah.
We talk about the hurt, and I think those are the spaces where Jesus was always moving into. Again, addiction is the branches, the coping mechanism, the branches, the pain, the hurt. Those are the roots.
Yeah, and I haven't seen any gender breakdowns of who's struggling more with addiction right now. I could guess it's probably men. But what would you say to a wife or to a husband who's watching their spouse really starting to spiral down and not knowing the first sentence out of their mouth for how to bring this up? They're aching for what they're seeing. How would you encourage them to right now they're on eggshells, to start the conversation about help?
Yeah. Well, I think a couple ways to look at it, and I it's like we would see behaviors and we'd see things happening up here, and behind every behavior is emotions and feelings. But underneath behavior and underneath emotions and feelings is an unmet need. And so our tendency is to begin to talk about behavior. Let's talk about the behavior that I see. When really the better and more helpful conversation starter point is let's talk about the unmet need. Let's talk about the root, right? Let's talk about the core. Again, even if it was men don't actually want to talk about the feelings either. We don't want to talk about, behavior's kind of a tough on-ramp to a conversation. Feelings is sometimes a tough on-ramp to a conversation. So maybe we talk about the unmet need. And I would say, again, being aware of our own judgment, our own fear, our own desire to control, and just release that as best as we can and say, I care about you, I empathize with you, I can see the pain problem, I'm not focused on the addiction problem. And so let's begin our conversation there.
That's good. In my experience, a lot of times, and I think the scriptures really point at this, especially with sexual addiction, it goes back towards bitterness or a level of entitlement that you feel that maybe it's connected to your trauma, but does that make sense? You have I feel entitled to something. I feel entitled to, and there's something you did not get, and now you're bitter, and so it comes out. and I forget there's a verse in Hebrews that talks about this, the sexual immorality, the root of that is actually bitterness. The root of it is, it's an entitled heart.
Yeah.
And so finding whatever that root is and starting to, I think this is really hard as a guy, because you're like, well, I have these feelings of entitlement. I have these feelings of bitterness. And I don't know about you, but as a guy, I mean, it's really hard sometimes to have an emotional vocabulary for what you're feeling, what you're thinking. And your wife only sees the struggle, you're like, I shouldn't be this way. But there's a whole other powder keg of.
Yeah, and if we went to women, maybe women are like, I am teaching homeschool. I am holding this family together. I am like 12-hour days trying to get this. And so I deserve this little area that I feel good for a moment.
Yeah.
And so again, our mind is always going to rationalize, always justify, always make some logical story that says, well, this is okay.
Yeah.
And that's, again, those are hurting thoughts. Those are because of pain, because we're overwhelmed, because we're trying to escape something. We just want to feel good for a moment. That's all pretty normal.
Yeah.
And so again, let's talk about it. Let's put it out there. Let's talk about the unmet need. Let's talk about the pain, not get caught in the drama and the judgment of the branches, or you're drinking too much, you're looking at this, you're spending too much money, you're eating too much, like whatever the escape mechanism is for our lives. Like let's get to the core.
I think at a certain level we've been descriptive of what addiction is, what's happening in the world. For a couple minutes, I want us to be prescriptive of, if I'm struggling with this, what do I need to go do? And I would say a couple things. One, if you go to the churchatrb.org, right when you get onto the website, there's a bubble that pops up, and it's somebody from our church who's there to help you. And so you can say, I just need help right now. And that might be the first place. If you don't know anybody or anywhere to start, that's the first place to start. The second thing I would say for somebody, whether it's alcohol, pornography, drugs, opioid addiction, whether it's
shopping,
no matter what it is, find one person who's safe, and just call them, say, hey, this is what's going on. Right now, this is like a baby dragon in my life, but it has the potential to become a monster dragon that could eat me alive if I don't talk to somebody about this. And so you have to cross that threshold and say, look, this is something I just need to get out there and I need to say to somebody. So find one person of the same gender. It doesn't need to be that person who's really cute that keeps popping into the company Zoom call. And you know them, they're safe. Even if you're not a part of this church, find somebody, have that conversation, get it into the light. I love that. That's what needs to happen. And see where it goes.
I love that. I think another way to look at this is it only requires one brave sentence to to move from addiction to freedom.
Yeah.
And I would encourage you, write it down. What is the one thing that you're frightened to say right now? What is the one thing that you're scared to say? And write your really brave sentence on the piece of paper, and let that be kind of work out all the thoughts and the confusion and all the different pieces. Write down the core of it, what you need to say. I need help with this. I am struggling with this. And then find that person, whether it's through the chat, through the website at CRB, whether it's with a safe and trusted friend, with a counselor. The other thing is there's recovery groups that are meeting online. There's a lot of great resources online, but you got to name it. You got to put it in a complete sentence. They're probably the scariest words you might say in this season, but that's the pathway to freedom.
Yeah. And you're at a point where your pain is starting to increase from this addiction, and your desperation you have to start to see my desperation factor is going up. I need to change.
Yeah.
And you're like that far away. You're a sentence away. I love that idea. Mike, thank you so much. I think there's a lot of people we probably won't even know. This is going to help in lots of ways. Thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Jared.